Hey coders, welcome to another exciting tutorial on coding with NJ. If you are new to my channel, don't forget to hit subscribe button, like and share as well. Have you ever wondered how can you enhance user experience when it comes to uploading images? Imagine giving your users the ability to see a preview of their selected image before hitting the upload button. Well, today we are going to make that happen. So let's get started. Okay, so this is the code for the demo project that you just saw. So what we are going to do is that we are going to select all and delete it so that we can start fresh. And if you notice, currently we only have one file, index.html. Since this is a very small project, so we are going to define the style as well as the JavaScript code in this same file. So no more files, just one file. So let's get started. Let's generate skeleton code. Let me close this. Okay. Let's change the title. Now in the body, let's start with h1. Now let's create a form. Let's remove this action attribute because we are not interested in submitting the form today. Now within the form, let's create an input field. I'm putting these input fields because I want to mimic user registration form. There you provide some details regarding yourself and then you upload a profile picture. So that's the kind of visual effect that I want to create. However, obviously this is not mandatory. You can use this logic wherever you feel appropriate. So placeholder, enter name. Then let's put another input field for email. Let's give it name email as well, and placeholder. Now this is the only input field which is mandatory to upload a form. So we have to create an input field of type file. Let's give it a name. Let's make it file and ID file as well. Okay, so that reminds me, this form needs to have one attribute must define, which is encryption type. And the value for this encryption type should be multipart / form data. T is missing. Even this attribute is not mandatory for the type of logic that we are defining, which is how to preview an image before uploading it on the form. But in actual scenarios, you obviously want to upload that form to the server. So for that actual form submission request, if you want this image to be sent along with that request, you must set this encryption type attribute to multipart form data. Okay, now let's go back to the form. Now after this input field of type file, now let's create submit button. Let's make it upload. So before we move on to defining the actual logic, let's give it some styling so that it looks more presentable. So let's go up in the head section. Let's create style tags, and within this style tags, let's define some basic styling for the form. Since it's very basic styling, so I'm going to define the styling and then give you the overview because I don't want you guys to be bored with that styling. Okay, so this is the styling that I have defined. For the body, I'm setting the margin all around 3 range. For the display, I'm setting it to flex and flex direction column, justify content and align item centers so that all the contents in the body should be placed in the center. And then I'm giving a background color to the body that is light gray. Then let's move on to some styling for the form. So for the form, the width is 40%, margin is auto. That will again put equal space at left and right sides of the form. So that will again basically place the form in the center. Display flex direction column, justify and align item centers. Again, they will all come on their respective rows. They won't be in a single row. Okay. And for the input fields, all the input fields inside the form except for the type file. So I'm skipping that input field, but for the rest, I'm giving every input field width 100%. So that means as much space as it's occupied by its parent, that is the form itself. So the width is 100%. Height for each input field is 50 pixels, and margin is top bottom 15 pixels, and left right 0. So let's see how it has affected the presentation. Okay, so this is how currently our form looks. Now this is the input field. I didn't define any logic for this one because I didn't want any space between these input fields. That wasn't look very appealing. So I skipped giving it any width and height. Now if you click on this form, you select some form. So now the name has been replaced over here. So whatever file have you chosen, the name of that file in your system is added over here. So the image that I have selected contains the name subheading space bracket 3.png. So that was the name, but we can't actually see any image over here. So that's the actual logic for which we have gathered today. So let's get started. So for that, what we are going to do is that within the form itself, we are going to create or place a div. So before this input field of type email, sorry, not email, the file. Before that, we are going to place a div. Let's give it a class name image div. And within this div, let's place actually an image whose source is currently empty. Alternate, let's make it image preview. So in case for some reason if the image is not able to be displayed, then we will see this text over there in its place. Okay, so now let's go up again and let's define some styles for this div, basically some width and height. So width, we are giving it 100% of its parent, that is the form's width, because it's inside the form. But for the height, let's make it 300 pixels. Okay, so that's the only styling that we are going to define for this image. Now let's move back and let's see how it looks. Okay, so this is how it currently looks. This is the total space occupied by the div that we just created. Now we have to define the rest of the logic through JavaScript. So the first thing that we are going to do using JavaScript is we are going to basically set its display property to none, which will hide this div. So these two input fields will come back again over here. The reason for not defining the display property to none in the CSS itself is that because we will be manipulating through JavaScript, sometimes we will be making this div visible, sometimes we will be making this div invisible, depending on whether we have selected an image or not. If we have set the display property to none in the CSS itself, that sometimes takes the precedence, and the new settings that we are defining through JavaScript sometimes doesn't take precedence. So we have to make sure that the logic associated with hiding or displaying this div is all defined within the JavaScript itself. Okay, so now let's go to the bottom. Before this ending body tag, let's define the script tag. Now within this script tag, let's first get access to the div that we want to hide. So we are going to create a reference to that div. So document.query selector, we have given it a class name .image div. Now let's set its display property to none. So div.style.display. Actually, let's not do that. So what we are going to do is that we are going up to our styles and we are defining some logic for a class named hide and set its display property to none. And using JavaScript, we will attach and remove this class to this div. So the first thing that we have to do is that div.classlist.add this class, which is hide. Okay, now you can see the div has disappeared. Next, since we will be attaching the image to the image tag, for that we need to access its source property, so therefore we need to have a reference to this div as well, to that image tag as well. So const image document.query selector, and it's a tag, so no dot, just image. Okay, now the next logic that we have to define is associated with the, when we click on this choose a file and we select some file from here, then we should be able to see that file or that image in the browser. So that means we have to define this logic with the event associated with this input field, and the event which will be triggered when we select a file is change. So we have to define an event listener for the change event associated with this input field. So let's go. So get a reference to that input field. So const input document dot query selector. Now since we have multiple input fields, but we are interested in an input field of type file, so we have to say input quotations, input type equals file. Now let's define change event listener for that input field. So input dot add event listener. The event that we are interested in is change. Now let's define the closure or callback function. Okay, so within this callback function, first of all we have to make the div appear. So for that we are going to do div dot class list dot toggle height. So what this toggle will do, if this class is attached, it will remove this class name from this div. However, if it's not present, then it will include this class to this div. Since this hide class is already attached to the div, because we did that at the beginning, where is it? Over here. So this toggle will remove that class, which in turn will make that div visible. But before we do that, what we are going to do is that we are going to check if the file has been selected or not, because sometimes what happens is that we click on choose file, but then we close this before selecting the file. Okay, so in order to check if any file has been selected, for that we have to check if for this input field, since we are inside this callback function, so this callback function has access to this input field with the keyword this. So this dot files. So files is one of the properties which will give us an object of type file list, which is basically an array and which will contain all the files that has been selected. So there is a possibility that we might select more than one file, so we are always interested in the first file. So if that file list object returns an array, and if that array contains some file, so for that we are going to say, so if there is a file, in that case we want this following logic to be carried out. So first thing is that make this div visible. Then let's store this file in some variable. So let's create a variable or constant name file and store this dot files at index 0. So this represents this input field. So we are accessing an attribute or property of this input field, which will return us an array of type file list. So we are accessing the first element of that array. Now we have access to this file. Now the next logic that we have to define is that we have to set the source property of this image tag to this file so that the image can display that file. But this file is in a format which cannot be displayed directly in the browser. It has been converted into blob format, so we cannot directly display anything which is in the blob format. We have to convert this blob format into some other format which could be displayed in the browser. So what we are going to do is that we are going to convert this file from blob format to data URL format. So if you don't know what data URL is, it's basically a kind of a URL, just like any URL, let's say something like this. So the format is different, but for the understanding you can think of this. So sometimes to this URL we attach some data to it by then question mark, and then like this one, image hyphen files equals, this is the value. So this becomes the query string or data attached to this URL. So we have to do so data URL is something like that. The first part is the data URL, which will identify that what kind of data this URL contains, such as is it application, is it text, or is it images, so that sort of things. Then the second thing is sometimes we define the encoding, especially if the image is attached, then we define the encoding that has been used to decode that image. And the next part is the data, that is the image itself. So we convert that image into text which is encoded into some format, and that text is basically readable for the browser. So browser is able to make sense of what that text is and recreate that image from that text. So that thing is called data URL. And since that data URL contains the whole image inside the URL, so we call them inline URLs as well. Okay, so to convert this file into a data URL, the first thing that we have to do is that we have to go outside this input field and define global variable or constant. Let's give it name reader, and let's create an object of our type FileReader. So we have created an object of type FileReader, and stored it in a reference called reader. Now this reader can read files in different formats. So we will make sure that this reader reads this file as a data URL. So we are going to do that within this event listener. So let's go inside the event listener, and over here we are going to say reader.read as data URL. We are telling reader to read something as a data URL. Now we have to provide what is that something, and we are passing this file as something. So we are saying read this file as a data URL. So now this reader contains this same file which was in blob format or in some binary format which was not readable for the browser, that has now been converted into a data URL. Now the next logical thing which might be coming to our minds would be something like image.source equals reader. So we are assigning this reader to image source, but it won't work. The reason for it not working is that when we ask reader to read something as a data URL, it's a process. So it takes time to complete. Depending on the size of the file that we have given it to read, it is going to take a while to complete the reading. So if we immediately try to assign this reader to this source, the reader might still be null. So in that case, the source will get set to null. We don't want that to happen. We want to be certain that this source property gets set to this file, but in the data URL format. So we have to make sure that the logic that we are defining, which will set the source to that data URL, should wait until we are certain that the file has actually been completely converted into data URL. And how can we do that? For that, we have to wait for some event to trigger, which is defined on this reader. So once the reader gets finished, that means once it's finished reading this file as a data URL format, it will trigger an event which is called load event. So we are going to define another event listener on this reader. Sorry, not another event listener on reader. We are defining another event listener, but on the reader, this is the first one. So onload. So we are going to define an arrow function, and we are passing it the event which gets triggered. So now this event will hold all the information which got triggered. So using this event, we will get access to this reader. So this will be event.target. So the target of this event is this reader. So now we have access to this reader, and to actually read the data which is stored in the data URL format, we have to access this reader's attribute or property which is called result. So this result is an attribute defined on this reader which will actually contain this file in the data URL format. So we are actually interested in accessing that result. Now we have to assign this to image.source. So image.source is equal to event.target.result. Okay. Now if you notice over here, we are saying read the file as data URL, but the event which should get triggered, we are defining the logic for it later. So this will again create confusion. So the thing is this statement will happen first, and before we move on to this one, probably this reader has already finished reading this file and has triggered the event. But by this time, since this onload event is not defined, so this load event gets triggered and goes unnoticed. So if we actually want to capture in all circumstances this event, so we have to make sure that we define this logic for reader.onload before actually reading the file as data URL. So first of all, we are defining this onload event, and then we are starting the reading process. So this will ensure whenever this load event gets triggered, we are able to execute this event listener and execute this logic. Okay, now let's go and test out in the browser if the logic that we have defined so far is doing its job. Refresh and choose a file. Congrats, something, let's select this one. Okay, good. So we are able to see the image, but it's way too big. So we have to make sure this image fits within the boundaries of its parent div, which was the image div. So let's go up to the styles. So this is image div. Now for the image itself, so width is 100%. Okay, good. But now it has occupied the space of input field as well. So we have to fix this problem. So for that we can take two approaches. The first one is that let's set the height to inherit. So whatever is the height inherit from the parent, set it to that. Let's go and test it out. And as you can see, now the image is also respecting the height assigned to its parent. The other is, if you replace this width to max width and 100% and set max height to 100%, that will also work, but I'm going to stick with this approach. Okay, so that part is done. Okay, so now if you notice, the image is not visible even though we can see the file has been selected. That's because we are defining the logic for making the div appear and disappear with the toggle one. So we are saying toggle the hide class from this div. So when we first time selected the div and this event listener got triggered the very first time, it removed the hide class from this div, which made this div visible. But next time when this event listener again got triggered, the hide class was missing, so it inserted this hide class to this class list, which in turn made this div invisible. So even though the image is present, now it's invisible because the div is invisible. So what we are going to do is that we are going to replace this with manually making this div visible. So div dot class list dot add, sorry, not add, remove hide. Okay, choose a file, some file. Okay, now let's check if it's this time visible or not. Okay, good. So it's not getting invisible. That's there. Okay, so this was the whole crux of today's tutorial, how to be able to preview an image before uploading it. But let's make this tutorial more interesting and learn something new, which is basically we cannot change the presentation of this input field of type file. So it will always look something like this. Choose file and then over here you will be able to see this file name. However, since you cannot style this input field, that means whatever is the styling that you have chosen for your rest of the website, this button will not go with that styling, and this in turn will look out of place. So if we want to make sure that our input field looks coherent with the rest of the styling, we have to apply some tricks, because we cannot directly apply styling for this one. So the workaround for this is that we are going to create two more buttons. Collectively they will perform the same logic, but we won't be able to see the input field of type file like this in our web page. So here is the overview of how we are going to achieve that. The first thing that comes to our mind is that we have to make this input field hidden, but we cannot set its display property to none or hidden. If we do that, this input field will not work. So we have to hide it, but some other way, without touching its display property. For that, we are going to go up and define some, let's go where we have defined forms. Okay, over here we have to define an input field, type equals file, set its width to 0, height to 0, margin 0, heading 0, line height also 0, overflow is hidden. Most of all, set the opacity to 0 as well. Now as you can see, even though the input field is there, but we can't see it. So we have made this input field disappear without setting its display property to none or hidden. Okay, next we need to define two more buttons within the form itself. So where is it? Okay, so this is input field. So after this div, let's create two more buttons. First button, let's give it the class name select and text select as well. For the second button, let's give it class name reset and the text is reset as well. Okay, so we have to make sure they occupy as much width as the rest of the contents of this form. So let's go up and define some styling for the buttons. So we have two buttons, which is going to be the 100% of the parent, and the height, let's give them how much height I've given to the input fields, 50 pixels. So let's make it slightly shorter, let's make it 30 pixels. Let's prepare it with form. Okay, good. Let's put some margin as well. Margin top bottom 10 pixels and left right 0. Okay, good. Now the logic that we want to define is that at any instance one of these two buttons should be visible. Both of these buttons cannot be made visible at the same time. So if select is visible, reset should be invisible. If reset is visible, select should be invisible. This is one part. The second part is that when we click on this select button, actually what should happen behind the scenes is that our hidden input field should get clicked. This will in turn open up the file selection menu. From there we will select the file and that file will be made visible in the browser. So let's define event listeners for both of these. First of all, let's get access to both of those buttons. So const select document.query selector. The class name is select. The second one is reset. Document.query selector .reset. Now when the web page is first loaded, the reset should be invisible. So reset.style.display equals none because it's JS, so quotations. Reset.style.display. Okay, good. So now the reset is invisible. Next, we have to define event listeners for both set and reset. So let's go down. Select.add event listener. Since it's a button, so click. Let's define callback function. Okay. So the first thing that we want is when the select button is clicked, we want this event should get triggered, the input change event. So for that we have to say input.click. Now what this will do is that it will open up the window from where you can select the image for the preview. So let's see, select, and this in turn opened this menu from where you can select the image. Okay, now let's click on select some file and nothing happened. Now even though it looks like as if nothing has happened, but if you notice the address in the address bar, this part has been attached to the address. Now where did this part come from? Well, this part is getting attached because our form has tried to submit itself. So basically if you define any button inside the form and you click on it, the form being form will try to get itself submitted. So the same thing has happened the moment I click on this select button, even though the file got selected, but after that whatever was present, the forms tried to submit to the backend and then reloaded this whole page. So that's why we see these parts getting attached to the form. But we have to block this behavior because we haven't defined any backend and we don't want to submit the form at the moment. At the moment we only want to select an image and preview it before clicking on this upload button. So we don't want this form to get submitted unless we click on this upload button. So basically we have to make this form hold on to its urges, which is trying to submit itself. To make this form stop itself from submitting, we have to attach another attribute to the form, which is on submit. So we are saying when this form tries to submit itself, we want to return false. So attach this thing and now the form will not submit. So basically what happened earlier was when we clicked on it and selected an image, the image got selected, but before it got any chance to display it for the preview, the form rushed and tried to submit itself and reloaded the page. And once we reload the page, obviously there is no image to display. Now since we won't be able to submit the form and the form will not be reloaded, we will be able to see this image. So select an image and we can see an image over here. Now the next part is once the image is selected, we want this button to disappear and reset button should reappear. So we have to work on that logic. So again, let's go down where we were defining. So once the input button has been clicked, that means we have selected an image. We want the select button to disappear and reset button should appear. We can define some logic over here. We can say this dot style dot display equals none and reset dot style dot display equals block. And for the reset one, let's attach an event listener. Click and copy these two lines of text, paste. And for this dot style, when the reset button is clicked, this dot style dot display gets none and set dot style dot display gets visible. But I think we have to make some changes over here. I'll get to that part later, but first let's go and test it out. Refresh, select. Okay, now we see the reset button. Now click reset. We forgot to make this div invisible in the reset button. So first thing, div dot style dot display equals none and image dot source also equals empty. Okay, select, reset. Now the image has disappeared, but we can't see any select button. Okay, so this is not select, that's why. So select dot style dot display equals block. Okay, select and we see an image. Now reset. Now reset again, made the image disappear and select button is visible. Now let's suppose now I don't want to select any image, rather I am clicking on this cancel button. So now over here we are still seeing the reset button. We should be able to see the select button over here. So we have to make some adjustment to our logic. So we can account for those changes by moving these two lines of code which we have defined in the event listener for the select button from the select button itself to the, let's say, copy and commit them out over here. Let's go up to the change event associated with this input field. So if we have actually selected a file, in that case we want the select button to disappear and reset button to appear. However, if that is not the case, we want select button to reappear and reset button to disappear. So select button block and reset to none. So if we click on the select button and then we don't select any file and close this window, so we should still be able to see the select button. But if we do select a file, now we should see the reset button. Now if we click on reset button, this image should disappear and we should again see the select button. Okay, so click on select and let's select some image, but we can't see any image over here. So now what is not working properly? Okay, that's because in our earlier logic we have been hiding and making the div visible by attaching and removing this class hide. But in the set and reset we are using the display property itself. So we have to replace that logic to div.class_list add hide. It's not within the quotations. Okay. Select, attach an image. Now reset, select some image. Okay, we are able to see the image. Reset again, select, don't select any image, close the window, and we can still see the select button. Okay, so with this we have reached the end of our today's tutorial. I hope you did like it, and if you did, please don't forget to subscribe, click on the bell button like and comment as well. Thank you so much. Bye bye.